Twilight by Tuesday Lobsang Rampa. Read for you by BlueFriend in beautiful BC. Chapter 5. Your covers are terrible, just like the cheapest kind of science fiction, wrote the happy little soul who had to have something about which to find fault. Normally I should have chucked his letter straight into the garbage bin and not given it a second thought, but unfortunately I have had such a lot of letters taking me to task for the covers of my books, particularly the cover of The Third Eye. I am told it is hideous, disgusting, beastly, enough to put anyone off, and all that sort of thing. Well, dear beloved readers with love in your hearts, and those without any love anywhere, let me tell you this. I'm just the author, you know, the poor fellow who writes some of the words and sends it off to a publisher. Now, I hope what I write gets published. I hope that sometime I may be able to get some illustrations in a book. In this particular book, I wanted illustrations connected with the hollow earth, etc. But the publisher is the only one who can say what the cover shall be. The author has no say whatever about the cover. In fact, most times the poor fellow doesn't see the cover until some irate reader sends him a copy with the devastatingly offensive letter blaming the author for everything. I am responsible for the words, but I am not responsible for the covers, nor am I responsible for the lack of illustrations, nor am I responsible for the quality or lack of quality of the paper. If you don't like those things, well, for Pete's sake, get out your pens or your typewriters and you write to the publisher and tell him off, not me. This is one time when I am innocent. There aren't many times when I'm innocent, but this time, yes. Another thing people complain to me about is what they claim is the high price of my books. Some people say the price is excessive. Well, I disagree emphatically. When people write to me complaining about the price of my books, I remind them that they will go to a cinema or theater or go out drinking their heads off, or they will spend money on cigarettes and not complain at all about it. And yet, for the price they pay for my books, they can have a completely new outlook on life or on death. So take it from me, I think the price of my books is extremely reasonable, and I wish the publisher would double that price. Now, Gail Jordan writes to me and asks me some questions. One question is it wrong for a woman to cut her hair? Does it interfere with her aura or her spiritual vibration in any way? No, of course not. Hair is just a bit of growth which really doesn't matter at all. All this stuff about Samson being weak as a result of having his hair cut is a mistranslation. What happened was, the poor fellow was beguiled too much by Delilah, and he got too energetic sex-wise, and that's what really weakened him. So, ladies, cut your hair if you want to. Shave the whole darned lot off if you want to. In fact, when you have become a women's libber, you will probably have to shave the whole lot off and glue it on your chin to show you are the equal to a man and that you have a beard. Question 2 from the same person is that I mentioned in one of my books that a man and a woman could be compatible if their vibrations were on the same level. How does a man and woman reach the same level of vibration? Well, by having the same sort of nature. It's not like tuning a piano. You have to make sure that these two people like each other, that they can put up with the undoubted faults of the other. There is no other way to do it. If they like the same type of reading, the same type of music, the same type of entertainment, well then, undoubtedly their vibrations will be much the same. It is not possible to know when you're marrying the right partner, but nowadays marriage seems to be a very haphazard business. I know a young couple who've been living together without marriage for 4 years. They got on quite well together. Then they got married, and they have been knocking each other's heads off ever since. Again, near where I live, there is a young woman who is now in a state of hating everyone because she got married and after a week or two found that marriage was not what she expected. So, without giving marriage a chance, she rushed off and got a divorce. Now, she is a bitter, frustrated woman, and she certainly looks it. Marriage is a very important business, and like all important businesses, it should not be entered into lightly. There's a lot of give and take in marriage, and nowadays women are such spoiled babies, such errant women's libbers with their equality stunt, that they just do not give marriage a chance to work. And the way things are going on, soon there won't be any more marriages. Soon people will just live together for a time and have a baby, and then when the communist state comes, the state will take over the baby's welfare, and that's all there will be to it. And so there will be a breakdown of civilization. Let me tell you something. Women nowadays are neurotic. They go off their heads at the drop of a hat because they are trying to compete with men, and they are not organically equipped to compete with men in all fields of work. So they get frustrated and they have a mental breakdown. Well, it shows they're a bit loose in the top story to go in for this women's lib stuff anyway. In the old days, a woman looked after her family. She looked after the children and she was healthy. She was also happy. You don't see happy women nowadays. They're always ready to move the chip on their shoulder and toss it in some man's face. Another question. What is your astrological sign? Well, that I will never tell. I think it is an impertinence to ask. If I wanted people to know my astrological sign or my birth data, then I would have told them so in my books. So I've had a lot of letters from would-be astrologers who were going to set the world alight with their brilliance, who wanted to know my data so they could work out my horoscope for me, but they never get a polite answer from me. Say, Miss Jordan has a lot of questions. Here's the 4th one. As a person reincarnates, does he follow the signs in order, beginning with Aries and ending with Pisces? No, he doesn't. He comes not merely in the sign, but in the quadrant of the sign, which will afford him the best opportunity for learning in that life, that which he has to learn in that life. He has eventually to live through every sign and every quadrant of every sign, not, as I said, in the order of the zodiac. And he may have to live dozens of lives in just one quadrant of one sign, because, remember, we live thousands of lives on Earth. Question 5. You stated in one of your books that music could raise one's level of vibration so that one can become more spiritual. Could you list some composers, songs, musical arrangements, etc.? No, of course not, because what suits some people does not suit others. I, for example, am very partial to Chinese and Japanese music, and some of the Western music really sets my nerves on edge. I don't know why people like it. So if I give my own list of music, the average Westerner will get a pain in his eardrums. So, each person has to find the music which is most suitable for him, but I tell you here and now, most definitely, most emphatically, that people are ruining themselves with this awful rock music and this awful jazz muck. Such music, if one can use such a term for such a conglomeration of noise, causes nerve strain. Look at some of the young people, the hippies, for instance, who go in for these rock festivals. Well, they are a dim-looking lot, aren't they? Most of them look as if they are dropouts from some mental home. Just take a look at them yourself and see what you think. All right, here's your last question, Gail Jordan. Have you ever heard of the chain letter that has gone round the world a number of times? After a person receives this letter, he is supposed to send it to 20 people, supposedly according to the letter. If you don't continue the chain, death will follow. Anyway, this letter has frightened and upset many people, especially older people. What do you think about it? I think that the people who write these chain letters should get their brains tested, always assuming that one can find some brains to test. I've had quite a lot of these ridiculous things sent to me, and if possible, I trace the last sender and send back the letter together with a reply which is hoped will singe his eyebrows. I think chain letters are the epitome of crassness. I just don't understand why people place any belief in such errant nonsense. Of course you won't die if you fail to send on these letters. If there had been any truth in it, I would have died many times during the past 20 years. So, in my opinion, if you get one of these letters, try to trace anyone on the list and send it back with an expression of your opinion about the mental stability of the person who sent it. It shakes them. I've had some of them write back to me and apologize and really sincerely thank me. You try it and see. Now, I've got a letter here. I wish it were compulsory to use typewriters because I've got a letter here which is making me go cross-eyed. Anyway, the question is, you said that the OverSelf sends down puppets for the purpose of experience. My question is, once an entity experiences the thing it was sent down to do, does it go back to the OverSelf and become part of the OverSelf's mind? Does a person lose his identity as an individual, or does he become good friends with his OverSelf? I personally don't like the idea of just being a part of an entity's mind. I want to remain me. Could you explain this in more detail, as I have not found that particular answer in your books? Well, there is such a lot of confusion about this puppet business. You have to remember that an actor, when he's on the stage doing some particular role, actually lives as that particular identity. But when the show is over and he goes home to his lodgings, he can forget all about being Prince Dimwit or someone like that. So the OverSelf, which cannot be comprehended in the third dimension, is the eventual entity of a human, and the OverSelf sends down tentacles or puppets to gather certain information. You might say that you have the head of a detective agency who sits in his office and gathers information by his operatives. Those operatives report to him and give him a complete picture of that which he needs to know. Eventually, after eons of time, all the puppets come together and form the complete entity of the OverSelf. Question: what will happen to people who are involved in black witchcraft? As it is a tool for self-gain, they must be creating bad karma. Will they come back as priests, etc.? Unfortunately, there is a lot of nonsense written about magic, black, white, or any other color. Most times, the black magic person is just living in a fool's paradise. He or she has no power and cannot cast any bad spells, so the only person being harmed is the black magician, and he's just being foolish. He's just delaying his evolution. So if a man or woman is a stupid black magician in this life, then that life is deemed to be wasted, and the life does not count. So he comes back and starts over where he left on the life before the black magic one. Of course, if the black magician somehow causes harm to another person, then it is a black mark added to his karma, and it has to be paid back. But don't wish the poor fellow such a fate that he has to come back as a priest or something, because he won't be that important. Question: I have practiced my psychic abilities, and I thought I'm okay at telepathy. I can't seem to acquire the other abilities, no matter how hard I try. How can I find my purpose? Another way, should I try? Also, how can I find out how many more lives I have on Earth? You say you are okay at telepathy, but you cannot seem to manage to do the other metaphysical things. Well, I'm going to put it to you quite plainly that we are not all gifted in all branches of psychic stuff. Consider just the ordinary everyday life. As an example, you might be able to write, but can you draw? And if you can draw, can you write and do sculpture? Most people can do one or two things entirely satisfactorily, but if they're going to excel at all the metaphysical arts, then they have to have training starting even before 7 years of age. And while I can do everything I write about, I have other defects. There are a lot of things I can't do. I can't paint, for instance. I couldn't even paint the wall of a room with whitewash. So we all have our skills, and we all have our lack of skills. And the best thing we can do is make the most of what we have. There are certain people we call a genius. Most times such a person is exceedingly brilliant in one line only, and in other things he has, more or less, to be led around, because all his brain power goes to the one specific subject, to the detriment of his general knowledge ability. Question. People are paying a very large sum of money for transcendental meditation. It is a type of meditation that uses neither concentration nor contemplation. It is supposed to just happen when you learn your mantra. I feel that I am more relaxed, etc., but you suggest contemplative meditation. I agree with you, as I am a person who thinks about everything. Do you think it is wrong to pay such large sums of money for a course on transcendental meditation? My better judgment tells me that somebody's making money out of me, and I'm being foolish. Personally, I think that people are quite crazy if they want to pay a lot of money for this transcendental meditation stuff. I don't even know what it really means. To me, it's just a gimmick to get money out of people, because you either meditate or you don't meditate. You either walk or you run or you stay still. Now, if you're going to look at a thing, are you going to look at it with goose eyes, or are you going to look at it sensibly? Let's start a new cult, shall we, and charge a big sum of money. Let's tell people that they can see things better if they look at it with goose eyes. Let's charge them a few $100s. Soon we'll be able to retire and get away from it all. The Germans, you may remember, used to do a march called the Goose Step. Of course, it was very pretty to a distorted mind, but the act of doing the Goose Step was most exhausting for the soldiers. Transcendental meditation, for which I believe you pay a lot of money, is just, in my opinion, a stupid gimmick. You don't need it. All you need is meditation. That is my honest opinion, for which you have asked. Question. Can you see a person's aura in a letter or on it? How much can you tell about a person other than the words they write down? I feel really depressed because I don't know why I'm here or where I'm going or who I am. Can you help me? Yes, I can see an aura through a letter. It is by psychometry, though, and that is not so clear as when seeing the actual physical aura. If an aura is to be seen properly and to be of any real use to a person, that person has to be here with me in a room and at least 12 feet from another person. And the person must be entirely without clothes. Not only that, he or she has to stay without clothes for about half an hour while the effect of the clothes wears off. After all, you wouldn't examine a painting if it was still in its wrappings, would you? It really does amaze me how difficult it is to obtain women to help in aura research. I understand that there are some remarkable magazines which show all, and a bit more. Some of the illustrations, I am told, are nearly good enough to be used as an anatomical textbook. Now, young women, it seems, are most happy to pose definitely in the altogether, if they can have themselves photographed and the pictures circulated throughout the world. But when it comes to helping aura research, oh dear, dear no. They take fright immediately. I had a woman write to me and say that she was nearly dying with anxiety to help me with aura research. She was quite willing to take off her clothes and stand to be examined, even photographed. She was apparently willing to swear on a stack of Bibles and a stack of Playboys and Playgirls, too. So, being old and foolish, I saw the woman, and no, nothing would induce her to part with her clothes. She is another one of the ones who told me that she had made that offer as a method of getting to see me, but she didn't stay long. It does strike me as truly remarkable that some of these women nowadays will go to bed with any man, but they will not take off their clothes for an honest, sincere investigation of the aura. I have had women tell me quite bluntly that they would be delighted to go to bed with me in the dark. Well, I'm not interested in that. I live as a monk, and I am not interested in the female anatomy, except insofar as it will help me with auric research. And that research has come to a standstill for the specific reason that I lack money for equipment, and I lack women who will part with their panties. I have a question here which seems to be a bit remarkable. Tell me how many more lives I have on Earth. That seems to be a peculiar question, doesn't it? It's like a person starting school saying, "Tell me when I shall leave school." The answer, of course, depends on such a lot of things. This person who wants to know how many more lives he has, well, what is his state of evolution now? What task is he doing on Earth? How well is he doing that task? Is he trying to help others, or is he interested only in helping himself? Does he intend to go on trying to improve himself? Or is he going to engage in all sorts of hellishness? If a thing can be heavenly, surely it can be hellish as an opposite. It is not possible to say how many more lives a person has, because the number of lives to be lived depends entirely on the behavior of the person concerned. It's much like some of these prison sentences being handed out in the USA nowadays, where a person is sentenced to an indeterminate time, such as 1 to 4 years. That is, if the person becomes a paragon of virtue in prison and doesn't blot his copybook even once, then he can be out in a year. But if he does all the devilment that he can think of, he's going to be kept there for the complete 4 years. So there you are, Mr. So-and-so. The answer to your question is that it all depends on you, on how you behave, so you'd better be good. Now we've got a gentleman living in South Africa who has a series of questions which are certainly acceptable for this book. Let's have a look at them, shall we? Will the communists eventually take over this country? Yes. In my belief, a form of communism will sweep the world because, you see, nowadays, women in particular are trying to get what they call equality, and they are really gumming up the works. In the old days, a man used to go out and earn the money for the living, and a woman used to stay at home and look after the family. Nowadays, that doesn't happen anymore. A woman gets married, goes back to the factory the next day, and eventually, if she is unlucky, she has a baby. She stays home getting full pay, otherwise she shouts, "Discrimination!" And then almost as soon as the baby is born, it's shoved out with some day nursery people while the mother goes back to the factory. That is all the fault of the capitalists, you know, because their advertising makes people believe they have to have all these wonderful luxuries, like at least 2 cars in every garage, washing machines, TVs, a house in the country, a boat, and all the rest of it. So, they rush out and buy these things which they can't afford because they have to keep up with the Joneses. And then they get their credit cards and they pay interest on those charges. Eventually they are so deeply in debt that they dare not stay away from work. Both husband and wife have to work. Sometimes the husband or the wife has to take double jobs, moonlighting. And all the time, their indebtedness is increasing. But worse than that, the offspring are brought up without any parental discipline, without any parental love, and so he or she eventually ends up on the streets, lounging about on street corners and falling under the domination of a stronger child who, more often than not, is evilly inclined. And so we get gangs of hoodlums running about the streets, engaging in vandalism, beating up old people, just for the fun of it. I have been reading a case quite recently where an old man, over 65 years of age, was beaten up and robbed by a woman. Not only that, but she even took his artificial leg. Now, what would a woman want with an artificial leg? Anyway, as long as we have such an undisciplined society, we are ripe for communism. Already we have socialism. You should go to British Columbia and live under the government there. I was glad to get away from it. I believe, then, that a modified form of communism will sweep the world, and only when people are willing to live at home and raise a family properly will communism pass away. After a much worse time than we are having now, and we are having a bad enough time now, aren't we? We will have an age when people will slowly awaken from the false values which there are in the world today. Unfortunately, People nowadays are hypnotized by advertisements. They believe they simply have to have certain things. They fall prey to subliminal advertising carried out at the cinemas and by television. A person will watch a TV program and will then, after it, get up like a person in a dream and stumble out to a car and rush off to some supermarket and come back laden with goodies which he or she had no intention of buying and really has no possible use for, all because he or she was unduly influenced by advertising. All that will have to end, and at the risk of appearing to be an old boor, I say again that there will have to be a return to some form of religion. People will have to break free of the shackles of selfishness, because now they want, and they don't particularly mind how they get it. We have the age of the rip-off, wherein young people think it is definitely dishonorable to pay for things. Instead, they go into stores and ships and they make a definite practice of stealing. They go in numbers, and they distract the shopkeeper or clerk, and while that poor wretch is distracted, accomplices race through the store and take just about anything they want, anything that takes their fancy. I have seen it happen when I was in Vancouver. I sat in Denman Mall, in my wheelchair, of course, and I actually watched this happen, and I reported it to a sales clerk who just shrugged her shoulders and said, "But what can I do? I can't run after them or the whole store will be taken while my back is turned." So there will not be a golden age until people have had very, very much more suffering. They will have to go through all manner of hardships until their psyche gets such a battering that they cannot take hardships anymore, and so they awaken from their almost hypnotized state of being, a tool to the advertising people. But even then, they won't get much satisfaction out of life until the woman stays at home and forgets her women's lib aspirations and raises a family with decency, dignity, and discipline. There is another question here. Will the next master or spiritual leader begin his reign before or after the future world war? Surely the intelligent beings that will eventually settle here from afar are more spiritually advanced than one from Earth? We cannot have a real leader until people are ready for him. They will have to suffer much more first, and I'm going to tell you now that none of these much advertised, much tooted gurus are in any way to be regarded as a world leader. I have in mind one young man who has made a real packet out of being a spiritual leader. Apparently he's gone back to India, and his own government and the income tax authorities have caught up with him. There is a leader already ready for this earth, but until conditions are suitable here on earth, he doesn't have a chance. So he will not make his presence known until the conditions are suitable. After all, what is 100 years or so, or 1,000 years or so in the lifetime of a world? You see, all this civilization will eventually pass away, and others will come, rise up, collapse, and pass away to make room for others, because this earth is just a training school. And if we don't make a good job of it now, well, we keep on coming back until we have more sense. We people who write books get all manner of strange letters. For instance, I have had quite a few letters from people who tell me that they're tired of being pushed around. They've seen an advertisement for karate or judo or any of the Eastern martial arts, and they're going to rush off and take a course so that, according to them, right after the first lesson, they can go out and really toss a bully over their shoulders. And what do I think about that? Well, I think such people are stupid. To start with, in my firm belief, many of these people who advertise these karate courses or other such courses, especially when they're by correspondence, really should be prosecuted, because you just cannot teach such things by correspondence. And furthermore, one should never try to learn karate or judo or any of those other things except from an acknowledged and licensed teacher of the art. Nowadays, it seems to me, as an interested and trained observer, that a lot of young punks get hold of a paperback about the art of disabling the opposition. He, the young punk, reads it, and then he thinks, oh gee, there's a real packet of money to be made out of this. So then he has a wonderful idea. He will rewrite the book as a correspondence course, and then he will get his girlfriend topless, and almost bottomless as well, and he will have some photographs taken showing how a small girl can throw a big man. Then the advertisement is put in suitable, gullible publications, and the money comes pouring in. And the suckers really queue up to put their money into something which really isn't suitable for them. People ask me what I think of it, and I have a standard question, and it is, all right, you're being mugged after you have taken 5 lessons of a self-defense course, but what are you going to do if your attacker has taken 10 lessons? If he gets too much opposition from you, if you make his act of robbery too troublesome, then he is really going to beat you up, whereas previously he'd have only taken your money. The police, I believe, almost without any exception, advise a person to keep quiet, not to put up any opposition, because if a mugger or robber is desperate and he meets opposition, then quite likely what's going to have been a simple act of robbery could turn into rape or actual mutilation. It could even turn into murder. If you do not resist a robber, but instead observe very carefully what he's like, how big he is he tall, thin, fat, any particular mannerisms, what's his speech like, look at him carefully, study him, without appearing to do so that you can give the police a good, accurate description of the attacker. You must be able to describe him accurately. The color of his hair, for instance, the color of his eyes, the shape of his mouth and ears, any special peculiarities. For instance, does it appear that he's left-handed? Does he limp? Is there some distinctive item of dress which would enable you to identify him after? Remember, if he's arrested on your description, you may have to go to the police station and identify him in a police lineup, and you won't half look stupid if you identify a plainclothes policeman who has been stuck in there just to add to the number. So my strong advice is, keep calm, don't panic, and observe the attacker or robber very carefully, making mental notes of anything worthwhile. The best advice that I can give you is, don't go in for these silly cults. They won't do you any good. Another thing that people write to me about is these weapons which are advertised in so many magazines nowadays. It's usually for a thing that looks like a fountain pen. It's about the size of a fountain pen, and it is advertised as protection against attackers. It's a gas gun. You just wait until you're attacked, and then you grab this apparent fountain pen and press the end. From the other end there emerges a cloud of noxious gas which will disable a person for perhaps 20 or 30 minutes. In theory, this is a wonderful idea for protecting you. But think, can you be sure that wind conditions are right for you? If the wind is blowing against you, the gas cloud will not go out to your attacker, but it will gas you. And the attacker will have the biggest laugh of his life as he sees you writhing on the ground under the influence of your own defense weapon. All he's got to do then is to bend down, take your watch, any jewelry you've got, and you're quite helpless. There's nothing you can do about it. So, a strong piece of advice is, when you see these advertisements for gas guns, just smile with superior knowledge and do not buy. You may be laying a trap for yourself if you do buy. Remember this, the police are trained to find robbers. They're trained to deal with attackers. And if you go and try to defend yourself, then you'll find that if you get thoroughly beat up with your throat slit or something else, you won't get much sympathy from the police or from anyone else. Leave it to the police. That's the safest way. I am very, very unhappy about some of the advertisements which appear in various publications nowadays. For instance, people often send me advertisements which indicate that some crummy little firm has been advertising that they are making items specifically designed by Lobsang Rampa, or items which are made in Lobsang Rampa's workshop. Let me then get this clear now, once and for all. I do not make any items at all. I have no workshop. Instead, I spend most of my time in bed or in a wheelchair, and I have no facilities and no inclination for making anything of this nature. I have no business enterprises of any kind whatsoever, and I'm not connected with any firm at all, not connected directly or indirectly. There are 2 people only who can in any way use my name, and they are Mr. Souter of A Touchstone Limited, 33 Ashby Road, Loughborough, Leicestershire, England, and Mr. Ed Orlowski of Cove Head, York, Post Office, Prince Edward Island, Canada. For these 2 people, I have designed certain things and given them permission to manufacture as being designed by me and made by them. Now, apart from those 2 people, no one else at all has any right to claim that they are associated with me or are making items of my design. If they do claim that they have items of mine, and they are not named Souter or Orlowski, then you can be sure they are definite out-and-out frauds. I mention this because there have been so many of these sprouting evil growths advertising in psychic magazines. They advertise as if they are associated with me, as if they are bosom friends of mine, whereas actually they are usually quite the reverse. So, will you keep that in mind? You have been warned. End of chapter 5.